I heard a professor say that Hitler was a hero.
Professor wrote that we should kill all Zionists, that she's worked with them and sees how evil they are.
I cannot speak Hebrew with my parents on the phone on campus. I have stopped wearing Jewish symbols. I cannot talk about my holiday plans because they are Jewish. I have to hide who I am and where I come from.
Those are just 3 of the 1,200 written accounts submitted by Jewish students as part of that new national study on anti-Semitism on Canadian campuses that came out last week. I asked some friends and colleagues to read them for this podcast. The report's main findings already made headlines that 95.7% of Jewish students surveyed said they'd experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism in the past year. But there's much more to this report than that number. What else did the Jewish students tell the researchers? How did the study come to be? Why was it made public now? Did a mysterious bot attempt to hack the survey and skew the data? And now that we have the research, what happens next? The students' accounts are hard to read, even though we at the CJN and many of you have been hearing stories like these since October 7th, coming out of universities, colleges, and CJEPs, and about anti-Semitism happening not just in classrooms, but in washrooms, gyms, and even off campus. So much so that some students say they've considered withdrawing from a course or leaving university altogether. They've stopped wearing their Stars of David, some have stopped answering questions in class, and many say they don't bother reporting what happens to them to the authorities because they've seen very little has happened when other Jewish students have complained before them.
Unfortunately, that's also comes across in the data is the invalidation of people's experience. It's not just the incidents themselves, which are terrible. 96% are saying in the last year they've witnessed or experienced an incident, at least an incident, and 9 out of 10 are saying on a pretty regular basis. But it's that there's been no response.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Friday, August the 14th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The report came out August 5th, and it received wide coverage, including here at the CJN. But there's a story behind the study itself, because it was commissioned by the former federal special envoy on Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons, who had said on this program after she was appointed in October 2023 that she wanted hard numbers, bulletproof numbers, that she could then show to the government and the country on what exactly was going on campuses. A contract was signed, the research was paid for by the Canadian government, the Association for Canadian Studies Metropolis Institute was hired, and the 38 questions in the survey covered everything from campus climate and classroom experiences to threats, violence, mental health, and academic consequences. It went out through Jewish campus clubs and online, and it went live November 2025 for a month. More than 1,000 responses came in, but then one day something strange happened. Study co-author Jack Jedwab told me another 1,000 more survey answers came in all at once, overnight in December, all from Queen's University, all with the same answers saying anti-Semitism was not a problem. He said they couldn't track the answers to real people and determined it was an attempt to skew the data, so those answers got thrown out. 2 months later, Canada scrapped the Special Envoy's office and the Islamophobia office too, and said a new advisory council on rights, equity, and inclusion was going to take over. But this study got to see the light of day. A press conference in Ottawa at the National Press Theatre, 2 Jewish students came and shared their stories. Carleton University student Alexa Barrett-Toller and Rachel Seguin from BC, who zoomed in.
What does it feel like to question whether it's safe to tell someone that you're Jewish? To walk across campus and wonder whether wearing a Star of David, a Jewish necklace, or a kippah will change the way that people see you. To hear your parents say, maybe don't wear that today, not because they want you to hide who you are, but because they're worried of you making it home. These questions no student should be able to ask themselves here in Canada. My name is Alexa Barrett-Toller, and I'm a proud Jewish and Dominican graduate of Carleton University. I emphasize the word proud because my Jewish identity is my family, my history, my traditions, and the values who have shaped who I am today. Yet during university, it became something that I felt that I had to hide. When I started university, I thought my biggest challenges would be exams and deadlines. I never imagined that one of the hardest parts would be navigating what it meant to be openly Jewish on campus. After October 7th, I returned to class hoping difficult conversations could happen with care, nuance, and respect. Instead, I sat in a classroom where a professor said that the Jewish people were responsible for what had happened. After class, I spoke with my professor privately. I wasn't asking to shut down conversations. I was asking for fairness, context, and humanity. My story is not unique. I have spoken with countless Jewish students who hesitate before wearing a Jewish symbol, attending a Hillel or Chabad event, or simply telling other classmates that they're Jewish. Not because they're ashamed, but because they're afraid. No student should have to calculate whether being honest about who they are will make them a target. Universities should challenge our ideas, not our right to exist. My hope is simple, that no student has to hide a necklace, avoid a conversation, or stay silent about their identity just to make it through their school day. Every student deserves to feel safe, every student deserves to belong, and every student deserves to know that they never have to choose between their education and their identity. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Seguin, and I'm a fourth-year student at the University of British Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity to share one personal experience that changed how I viewed my place on campus as a Jewish student. In February 2024, I attended a general meeting of the Social Justice Center, an alma mater student society resource group at UBC, because I wanted to engage in dialogue. I wear a Star of David necklace every day, and during the meeting, it became visible. I wasn't wearing it to make a statement or provoke anyone. It's simply a part of who I am. After the meeting, I respectfully asked the group to cite the sources for the information it shared publicly and acknowledge the October 7th attacks alongside its discussion of the conflict. Instead of addressing my questions, the conversation shifted away from what I had asked. While I was trying to explain why this mattered to me, the co-chair interrupted me and said, "Look, I'm a Muslim. I don't hate you just because you're Jewish." I'd never accused anyone of hating me. I came to the meeting to discuss ideas, but I left feeling that who I was had become more important than what I was saying. I was advised that if I wished to pursue the matter further, I could file a complaint with the BC Human Rights Tribunal. As a student, I wasn't looking to begin legal proceedings. I was looking for support, accountability, and a meaningful process within my own university community. Instead, I was left wondering where a Jewish student is supposed to turn when they believe they have experienced discrimination. Universities and student societies have a responsibility to ensure that every student can participate in campus life, express their identity openly, and trust that concerns about discrimination will be taken seriously.
Those were two students speaking publicly about their experiences. The researchers had heard, though, from hundreds more. The report includes written accounts. Here are some friends and colleagues of ours reading the accounts.
In a course titled Canadian Law and Violence, the professor spent an entire semester discussing Israel's occupation of Palestine while encouraging students to miss class to attend protests, showing Al Jazeera videos, and wearing pro-Palestine shirts and earrings every week.
Working in my labs, I've had people refuse to work with me due to my Jewish identity and purposely try to mess up my data.
I and many other members of a Jewish organization unrelated to Israel received phone calls containing death threats after October 7th.
3 minutes after the start of our presentation on breast cancer, my professor interrupted us to slander Israel, saying it was a sea of savages and barbarians, and that every second 3 babies in Gaza were being killed.
I was spat on. Someone revved their car engine toward me in a crosswalk while I was wearing a kippah. I saw a Jewish student get punched. I heard a Jewish friend being called a Zionist whore and spat on because she was wearing a visible Magen David, a Star of David. I saw anti-Semitic graffiti in bathroom stalls and all over campus.
When I was at the campus gym while wearing a kippah that made me visibly Jewish, a student came up to me and said he wished all Israelis would die because we're a bunch of colonizers from Europe.
I went to the bathroom. Someone saw my Star of David and said, "Welcome to your gas chamber," while people were vaping.
Behind me in the study room, a group of students were talking about Hitler, the Holocaust, how it was supposedly false, how Hitler could have never killed Jews, and how the Holocaust was simply invented by Jews to obtain more money and remorse.
Since the report came out, there has been some criticism that the study did not adequately represent the diversity of Jewish opinion, particularly when it comes to Jewish groups or students who oppose Israel. The authors tell me they did include students with those views in the data. 57 respondents identified themselves as anti-Zionist. Another 44 said they didn't consider antisemitism to be a problem. The full report is publicly available on the government's website, and we put a link to it in our show notes. The published report doesn't include comments from any of those students. So, what do the report's authors and advisors want to happen now? The CJN's Zenith Wolf covered the press conference in Ottawa and then interviewed Carrie Cogan. He was one of the advisors on this report. He's co-president of the Network of Engaged Canadian Academics. They have 10 recommendations.
I know that the collections process for the survey took place between November and December 2025, but I imagine there was work that was being done before that. Can you
Exactly.
tell me how long this has been in the works?
This was commissioned by the former special envoy's office, right? It was probably 6 months before that we got started. I was on the advisory committee for the development of the survey, for the dissemination of the survey, and for the interpretation of the results. But once it went out, I mean, the data collection was pretty quick, actually, and it's a sizable survey. I think it's probably the largest per capita survey of students, arguably in the world, actually, if we do it on a per capita basis.
I'm wondering if you know why Canadian Heritage agreed to do this survey now.
The intention was to do it, but there was a K through 12 report that was done, led by Bob Brim. And then this was the follow-up study. And so we knew anecdotally, certainly, what was going on campus. We said we need to do the university piece and that a priority to then follow up. It's a little bit more complex in a university environment. You're dealing with different issues. And I think probably, maybe we'll talk about this, but the issues of, academic freedom and the way that universities are governed, that's different from K through 12. So they were looking for data, and this study had already been done. And so it became clear to Heritage that, well, we've already got this study that we've essentially completed. We should really make use of that, because the data is, the data is there, the report is ready, and it helps us in the work that we're trying to do to understand this problem. So Jack Jedwab and Paul Hawley are the two co-authors. Then that became the task of that advisory council. One of the priorities is anti-Semitism, as the Prime Minister mentioned when he spoke at Holy Blossom in Toronto, and specifically singled out universities. I can't speak on behalf of the minister, so I don't know, who within Canadian Heritage would have said, let's use that survey that exists. But clearly, this is an important issue for them. Clearly, they knew the survey existed, and then it was commissioned by the Special Envoy's office. And so they, supported the release of the report.
I mean, I think we both already recognize 96% as a vast majority of the surveyed students. I'm wondering, from your perspective, why it's so common on university campuses.
I mean, that's a complex question, right? We have to look at it as an evolution over time. Certainly anti-Semitism existed before October 7th, but it was accelerated, precipitously post October 7th. And I think, there's a bit of a snowball effect, because there was, I think, fair to say, not a lot of consequences to bad behavior. If we look at the encampments, if we look at some of the types of vandalism, the kinds of things that were said about Jewish students and to Jewish students, and very, very few consequences. So that has an impact. When there aren't consequences to these kinds of incidents, they become normalized. I think it's also fair to say that, like, when there are, these geopolitical conflicts, when you've got, a war going on in the Middle East, we know that's correlated with increased rates of anti-Semitism. And so it comes out of the woodwork, unfortunately. And in this case, in a very coordinated way. So you had situations in classrooms where had nothing to do with the Middle East conflict, whether it's a physics class or a chemistry class or whatever, with no connection with the conflict, that where professors and reports supports this. 1 in 5 of the participants reporting in the survey reported that anti-Semitism was coming from professors, and a lot of that was the kind of rhetoric that is anti-Zionist, abusive rhetoric, really, that traffics in all sorts of tropes that are essentially, a repetition of the kinds of things that we see in other forms of anti-Semitism. So essentially, Jews are, have excessive control, excessive power, and are essentially malevolent. And so we saw a lot of that going on in classrooms. People felt liberated, so to speak, to use their platform to kind of spew this kind of rhetoric that I think is very damaging. And then student unions, there are a number of boycott, divest, and sanction motions that were passed. Faculty unions. It's legitimate to criticize Israel. It's legitimate to criticize the way that the war is being conducted. It's legitimate to have these discussions. This was well beyond the pale when it comes to this kind of discourse. It was targeted. Jewish students were called out. I think there was some coordination. Organizations like ISGAP have investigated that kind of potential foreign interference, for example, that the university is a good place to kind of promote these ideas that we are seeing on campus, and the protection around speech that is vitally important. But in this case, I think just really crossed the line.
The discussion on Zionism brings me to another point. The report takes pains to differentiate between anti-Semitism, Zionism, and anti-Zionism. And I'm wondering how the people who were going through the answers were differentiating between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism that bled into anti-Semitism, and how that influenced the percentages or the numbers in the report.
Right. I mean, I think we have to. It's interesting that the sort of questioning about the legitimacy of what is and what is not anti-Semitism. And in this case, I think when you read the report, when you read the statements, I think we certainly. With other minoritized groups, we listen to what they say. And I think if you look at the fact that 50% of Jewish students are telling us that they feel a need to hide their Jewish identity, that they can't talk about their Jewish identity, 70% of them can't talk about it during class, where they are literally punished by people who are supposed to care for their career, advancement and education. Professors, literally punishing them if they have an opinion that differentiates from the professor's opinion, and told things like, there's one story in there about a student who talking about sexual violence on October 7th and was told, well, you're getting a 0 on this assignment, and you should really talk about sexual assault by Israeli police officers. I think we need to trust these students to know what is anti-Semitism. I don't see in those comments, and I've read all 1,200 comments, anything that indicates to me that we're talking about legitimate criticism of Israel. We're talking about totally inappropriate comments. Somebody, saying we should kill all Zionists, when we know from Bob Brim's work, 94% of Canadian Jews believe that Jews have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland, i.e. they're Zionists. So that's why we really were careful with the definitions, and we wanted to make sure that, that people weren't, people project all sorts of definitions onto Zionism that are simply incorrect. And, when you just explain it in a straightforward way, I think we can understand that. I think most of the students, I can't guarantee that 100%, but reading the narratives tells us that they do understand and are feeling. And look, 75% of them are explaining that they have mental health impact because of anti-Semitism on campus. So I think they know.
The report considered 900 of the students who reached out, but I believe it was a total of 1,038 who had sent in survey responses. How come? And that's over 10% of respondents who had been left out.
Right. So you have a phenomenon of data confirmation, like you want to look at the quality of the data, quality control. You may have incomplete data. Like if somebody fills out 1/10 of the survey, can you use that data, right? So for example, somebody just choosing all the same response option across a series of questions, that would be a problem.
The Association for Canadian Studies told the CJN there were other more alarming problems. They told us that on the final day of the survey being open in December, they received 1,000 exactly the same submissions overnight from an email address involved with Queen's University, all declaring they had no problem with any anti-Semitism. The researchers haven't been able to trace the persons who sent them in, but they discounted these extra 1,000. Here's Professor Kogan again.
But basically, there were bots that were sending in, unsurprisingly, the same exact responses to the survey, and then just goes to show you like that there are bad actors out there. The responses were clearly trying to minimize anti-Semitism on campus and to present themselves as Jewish and anti-Zionist, if I can put it that way. And so luckily they picked that up.
How do you believe that this report will inform policy that is made around addressing anti-Semitism on university campuses?
Well, I can tell you what we hope will be the case. What we hope will be the case is, NECA, the Network of Engaged Canadian Academics, which I'm the co-president of, we've come up with 10 recommendations that you may see on our website. We plan to disseminate the report to all the university presidents and provide them with those recommendations. I think what we're hoping for now is action, right? We've talked a lot about the problem. It's been 3 years almost now that we've known about this problem. I mean, as I said, it didn't start on October 7th, but it certainly got worse. And so we're hoping that, I think the first recommendation we make is enforce your policies. Like if you look at a student code of conduct policy, the kinds of things that we're talking about are unacceptable behaviors. And so, for a woman to walk on campus and threatened with rape is not acceptable. It's in the sexual harassment policy, right? So, being excluded from a student club because you're Jewish is not acceptable. So, we do hope that this is a wake-up call for action, and not just further policy development, but actually enforcing those policies that do exist. And if there are other policies that need to be implemented, and certainly, as Martha Piper mentioned at the press conference, we can do this. Like we can have, clearly accountability mechanisms put in place to ensure that that not just Jewish students, because this is not just a Jewish student problem. Like it actually reveals a bigger problem. If you can target a minoritized group like Jews, then you can target any group for any reason. And so it's a canary in a coal mine, I think is the expression.
You said that there are 10 recommendations. Of these recommendations, which do you think should be highlighted the most?
The implementation of institutional neutrality or institutional impartiality policies is really important. And we're starting to see some universities, I think, Carleton has just passed an institutional impartiality, policy, because what we've seen is whole departments declare that they're essentially anti-Zionist departments. Whole departments basically say that we subscribe to anti-normalization. We won't even talk about the issue because there's such a clear moral stance here that Israel is, is essentially, made up of moral monsters who are irredeemable, and the Jewish state needs to be simply destroyed. That we shouldn't even have this discussion. So that, to me, that is a clear violation of what the university is supposed to be about. And I would also say the other big one is the third one around academic freedom. We need to strengthen academic freedom. The academic freedom of professors is under threat. The freedom of expression of students is under threat, significant threat. When you've got professors telling you what to think and not how to think, we have a real problem.
And then lastly, I wanted to know a bit more about the follow-up study that's going to be done. I believe 755 non-Jewish students who were surveyed. Yep. Sorry?
It is done. The survey is done. The report is in progress.
90 days until it's done, correct?
Yeah, we hope it's released within 90 days. So it's working its way through, and that's the general population and their perception of anti-Semitism on campus.
It was split into two parts.
I think, Jewish students are suffering. Like they're really having a difficult time. We hear it. We hear, and the data speak to that. We wanted the focus initially to be on what is the experience of the people who are the targets of anti-Semitism. Let's start with that. right? Because these are the people who are, and by the way, like, I mean, just anecdotally, like I've received all sorts of text messages after the press gallery conference, and what people are saying is, I cried. Like that was the response. I mean, several people have said that, and I think it's because their voices haven't been heard. And I think, unfortunately, that's also comes across in the data is the invalidation of people's experience. It's not just the incidents themselves, which are terrible, but it's that there's been no response and the invalidation of that. So we really felt this was a priority to make sure that we were honoring the Jewish students who took their time to complete this, and to share their voice first, and then follow up with how people who are not Jewish perceive the problem.
The minister, Mark Miller, didn't attend the press conference in person, but former Senator Mark Gold did and read a statement from the minister which called the study's results alarming. Miller's office later told the CJN the findings will be an important resource for the Advisory Council. But some students aren't waiting for the government to act. There are ongoing legal actions and human rights complaints, including a class action lawsuit involving McGill University to hold institutions accountable. And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin's charitable foundation. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Izzy Helenchild. Michael Freeman is the executive producer, and Alicia Richler is editorial director. Your thoughts are welcome. We're at info@thecjn.ca. Thanks for listening.